December 31st, 1993, Fort Redwood, North Carolina. It was supposed to be a family New Year's. Instead, it began with a mother collapsing in the lobby of the sheriff's office. She had flown in from Florida with a suitcase full of gifts, expecting to spend the holiday with her daughter's husband, and the quiet little life they had built inside a fenced military housing complex. But the moment she arrived, that life shattered. Her daughter was gone. No goodbye, no note, no confirmed sighting anyone could trust. And worst of all, for days, it felt like no one was really looking for her. The woman's name was Margaret Ellis. She was in her 60s, pale, exhausted, and barely able to speak through the shock. Deputies had to bring in a medic after she nearly fainted at the front desk. When she finally managed to explain why she was there, the room changed instantly. Her daughter, Laura Bennett, 35 years old, an elementary school teacher, married to an Army officer, had vanished from the military housing area just days before Christmas. Margaret had traveled all the way from Tampa to surprise her for the holidays. Instead, she was being told that Laura had supposedly left on her own. That story didn't sit right with her for 1 second. Neither did the fact that the missing person report had only been filed after a delay. That was enough to get senior investigators involved. Detective Ray Holloway was assigned to take a fresh look from the beginning. And the more he read, the less he liked. According to the existing report, Laura's husband, Major Daniel Bennett, had told military police that he last saw his wife around 8 in the morning on December 22nd. He claimed he was returning from a training exercise when he spotted her walking quickly toward the front gate of the housing complex. She was wearing blue jeans and a gray winter jacket, and he assumed she was hurrying to catch the commuter train into the city for an exam connected to her graduate studies. He didn't call out to her, didn't stop her, didn't walk with her. He said he just kept going, figuring he would see her later that evening. But evening came, then night. And Laura never returned.
Laura, wait!
The
I
next
saw you
day,
heading for the
according to
exit.
Daniel,
You can't
he
just
called
leave
a few
like
of her
this.
friends after finding their numbers in her address book. None of them had seen her. After that, a missing person report was finally filed. On paper, it was possible. In real life, it felt wrong. Because people do disappear. Sometimes they leave willingly. Sometimes they need space. Sometimes they run from marriages that look perfect from the outside. But timing matters. And nothing about Laura's disappearance made emotional sense. She knew her mother was coming. She had never hinted at wanting to vanish. And the place she disappeared from, a tightly controlled military community, was not the kind of place where someone simply evaporates without somebody noticing something. Fort Redwood wasn't a huge installation. It was the kind of place where everyone knew who belonged, who didn't, who came home late, who got new furniture, who was fighting with whom, and whose marriage was starting to crack. Behind the fences and checkpoints, life looked orderly. But in the early 90s, military life was under a different kind of pressure. Budgets were shrinking, careers felt unstable. Promotions mattered more than ever. Pride mattered. Image mattered. And for officers especially, appearances could be everything. That was the first thing Detective Holloway noticed when he visited the Bennett's apartment. At a glance, it looked like the home of a respectable couple doing pretty well for themselves. The furniture was tasteful. Family photos lined the shelves. Laura looked polished and warm in every picture. Daniel looked proud, controlled, composed. They looked like the kind of couple people described as solid. But Holloway had worked enough cases to know that happy pictures are sometimes the cheapest lies in a house. He asked Daniel to walk him through the timeline again. The major did, calmly, almost too calmly. He repeated the same version: training exercise, early morning return, brief glimpse of Laura heading toward the gate, assumption that she was going into town, concern later that day, phone calls the next morning. It was all very neat. Too neat. So Holloway stopped listening to the words and started looking at the room. That's when he noticed something strange in the living room. One wall had a large rectangular patch where the wallpaper was noticeably brighter than the rest. The faded area around it made the shape obvious, A large rug or decorative wall hanging had been there for years. Now it was gone. Holloway asked about it casually. Daniel shrugged and said they had started doing some cleaning and wanted to freshen the place up before the new year. Old clutter out, simple as that. But in 1993, that explanation rang false. People didn't casually throw away good
The rug?
rugs,
Holiday
especially
cleaning.
military families
Got rid of
living
it.
on a budget.
No big deal.
Not a large
Just part
one.
of the season.
Not one nice enough to hang in the living room. Not days before New Year's. Still, odd didn't mean guilty. Not yet. Holloway continued the house walk through. He asked for Laura's personal items, her notebooks, her address book, photo albums, jewelry box, anything that might help explain where she could have gone or who she might have been planning to meet. The photos showed a woman who took care in how she presented herself. Styled hair, thoughtful outfits, small but elegant jewelry. Laura looked like someone who cared about details. That would matter later. For now, Holloway moved on to neighbors. Most of them described the Bennetts in the same vague way people often describe troubled couples from next door. Normal, quiet, nothing
The Bennetts
unusual.
seem so normal.
Yes, very
No
quiet,
screaming
keep to
matches
themselves.
anyone
It's
wanted
almost
to
too
admit
quiet.
hearing. No dramatic scenes, no obvious violence. But normal is one of the most useless words in criminal investigation, because people call a marriage normal right up until the body is found. Holloway considered every possibility. Maybe Laura had a secret relationship and left voluntarily. Maybe she had been attacked on the way to the station. Maybe the husband was telling the truth, and the danger came later. There were no answers yet. So investigators followed the route Daniel claimed Laura had taken. They checked hospitals, morgues, shelters, transit reports, and rail security contacts. They circulated her photo across the county and into neighboring jurisdictions. If Laura had boarded a train, someone might remember her. If something had happened on the
Photos
route,
up.
there might
Got
be
it.
a witness. The problem with disappearances is that the first days are everything, and several of those days were already gone. On New Year's morning, Holloway and 2 deputies went to the station Laura supposedly used for city trips. A ticket clerk recognized her face from the photo. Yes, she had seen Laura before. Yes, Laura took that route often. But could she say for certain Laura bought a ticket that morning? No. That uncertainty kept the case suspended in fog. So the detectives did something old school. Over the next 2 days, they rode the same early train, talked to regular passengers, and showed Laura's photo to anyone willing to look. At first, they got nowhere. Then finally, one woman paused. She was older, quiet, traveling with grandchildren when she had seen something that morning. She couldn't swear to every detail, but she was sure of one thing. A woman resembling Laura had been arguing with a man on the train. Not chatting, not flirting, arguing. And at one stop, the man had dragged her off the train. The witness had wanted to step in, but she had 2 small children with her and was frightened. If she was right, this changed everything. Now the disappearance wasn't a possible walkout. It was a forced encounter. Search teams were sent to the area around that stop. Woods, drainage ditches, abandoned structures, culverts. Everything was checked. Every search like that carries 2 opposite emotions. Dread and hope. You fear what you'll find. You also pray you'll find something that proves the person is still alive. On the second day, they found a body in a wooded strip a few miles from the tracks. A woman, jeans, winter jacket, severe facial damage from exposure in animals. Hard to identify by sight alone. For a few terrible hours, everyone believed it was Laura. But it wasn't. The victim was another missing woman from the city, a separate homicide entirely. That discovery did 2 things. It proved how dangerous the region could be, and it also cruelly reset Laura's case back to 0. So Holloway started over again. He returned to Laura's friends after the holiday weekend, this time asking smaller questions, not bigger ones. Sometimes witnesses don't lie, they just don't realize which detail matters. One friend remembered something odd immediately. The outfit, the gray jacket and jeans Daniel described, that didn't sound like Laura heading into town for an exam. According to the friend, that was the kind of casual outfit Laura wore only to take out the trash or run downstairs for something quick. If Laura had really planned a city trip, she would have dressed better, done her hair, put herself together. That was who she was. It was a small observation, but small observations break big lies. Holloway went back to Daniel and asked again what Laura had been wearing. The major didn't hesitate. He repeated the same answer. Gray jacket, blue jeans, same exact description. That should have strengthened his credibility. Instead, it made Holloway more suspicious. Because honest memory often shifts around the edges. Rehearsed memory doesn't. At this point, one theory began rising above the others. Maybe Laura had left on her own, but not for the reasons Daniel suggested. Maybe she had discovered something. Maybe she was planning to confront him. Maybe she had finally reached a breaking point. That led investigators to the question people around military families are often reluctant to ask directly. Was there another woman? When Holloway brought the subject up carefully with Laura's friends, one of them hesitated, then admitted Laura had been jealous lately. Not wildly jealous, not irrational, specifically jealous. Laura believed Daniel was seeing someone. Now the case had air. Holloway requested confirmation from the unit command timeline. He wanted to know exactly when Daniel's training exercise ended and when the men had actually returned. The answer cracked the whole story open. Most of the unit returned on the morning of December 21st, but Daniel had told investigators he returned on the morning of December 22nd, the morning he claimed he saw Laura heading toward the gate. Why was he a full day late? And where had he been? In a civilian town, that question would be hard enough to answer. In a military community, it was explosive. Because if one officer returns later than everyone else, people notice. Holloway pushed further, and with help from internal military investigators, they quietly began tracing Daniel's off-base contacts. A name surfaced fast. Linda Carver, 36 years old, worked at a small snack bar near the installation, single, lived in an apartment complex not far from the gate. Multiple gate passes had been issued to her in recent weeks. And who had authorized them? Major Daniel Bennett. That alone proved the affair. But affairs don't prove murder. So Holloway went to see Linda's workplace. And there, in the harsh fluorescent light of the snack counter, he saw something that made his stomach drop. Around Linda's neck was a pendant, amber-colored stone, gold chain. Distinctive shape. He had seen it before, in Laura's family photos. At first, he told himself it could be coincidence. Similar jewelry exists. Maybe Daniel had bought two. Maybe Linda bought her own. But when Laura's mother was asked to review her daughter's belongings, she said something
You don't act like
firm.
a desperate husband.
Laura would
What do you
never
want
have
from
given
me?
that piece away.
Your emotional absence
She
is
treasured
obvious.
I'm
Daniel's
here.
gifts, especially the sentimental ones. Investigators checked local jewelry stores for recent sales of similar pendants. Nothing, not one confirmed match. Now the pendant mattered, and Daniel's behavior mattered more. Margaret Ellis, Laura's mother, began complaining to Holloway that her son-in-law didn't act like a desperate husband. He was irritated by her presence. He kept disappearing
See that
for
blanket?
stretches
It's
of
freshly
time.
washed. It was
He
still
suddenly
drying there
suggested
after
that
Laura
maybe
vanished.
she should cut her visit short and go back home. That is not how people behave when they're waiting for the love of their life to walk back through the door. Then another witness came forward. A neighbor from across the courtyard had just returned from a holiday trip. When she learned Laura was still missing, she mentioned something odd she had seen shortly after the disappearance. A blanket had been hanging out to dry on the balcony, freshly washed. That alone might sound meaningless, except the neighbor added one crucial detail. Daniel was not the kind of man who washed anything. Not dishes, not laundry, certainly not a blanket. People often solve cases not by finding what is there, but by noticing what should never be there. Now Holloway's instinct hardened into certainty. This was not a disappearance anymore. This was a crime scene disguised as one. He needed something concrete, and then he got it, from the last place the original search had failed to reach. Laura's mother, staying in the apartment, was sitting on the living room couch when her hand slipped down between a cushion and an armrest. Her fingers caught on something metallic. She pulled out a broken gold chain, then the pendant, the same style pendant Linda had been wearing. And suddenly, the room changed forever. If Laura's chain had snapped there, inside that living room, then the struggle had happened there too. It also meant the first search had missed something vital. Now investigators looked back at everything through a new lens. The missing rug from the wall, the wash blanket, the delayed report, the false clothing description,
happened in that living room?
the extra day Daniel couldn't
It was
explain,
dark.
the affair, the duplicate pendant. All of it pointed in one direction. That same day, Holloway obtained authorization to bring Daniel in for formal questioning. At first, the major locked up completely. No anger, no confession, no panic, just a hard military silence. But silence is not strength when the evidence keeps closing in. Investigators laid out the timeline piece by piece. You returned a day late. You were with Linda. Laura knew about the affair. You lied about the date. You lied about her clothing. Her broken chain was found inside the apartment. What happened in that living room? Daniel's face barely moved. Then Holloway mentioned the chain again, how it must have snapped when Laura fought back. Something flickered, a tiny tremor, a shift in the jaw. It was the first crack, and once that crack appeared, the whole structure started to fail. Daniel finally lowered his head and said the words investigators had been waiting for. "I'll show you where she is." They
I
did
can't
not
hold
have
this
to
back
drive
anymore.
far.
The full
Laura's
truth is,
body
I
was
was
found
there that
buried in the
night.
basement
I saw
storage area of the
everything.
apartment building where Linda lived. She had been wrapped in the missing rug from the Bennett's living room, the same rug Daniel claimed they had thrown away during holiday cleaning. By then, Linda was already packing. Someone had warned
How
her
could you
police
let
were
this
asking
happen?
questions,
I did what
and
I
she
had to
was
do.
getting ready to leave town.
This is a disaster!
Daniel gave a full statement soon after. He admitted he had returned from training and gone straight to Linda, staying with her instead of coming home. By the time he finally went back, Laura was furious. She confronted him. The argument escalated. She threatened to report the affair, threatened divorce, threatened his career. And for a military officer in that era, reputation could feel like everything. At some point during the fight, Daniel snapped. He wrapped his hands around Laura's throat and didn't stop. During the struggle, her chain broke and fell behind the couch. After she died, her body relaxed, leaving biological traces on a blanket nearby. That was the blanket the neighbor later saw him washing and drying on the balcony. He then wrapped Laura in the large living room rug to contain evidence, removed it from the wall, carried her body out to his car, and drove through the gate without challenge. No one searched a respected officer's trunk. Why would they? On the other side, Linda met him and helped conceal the body in the basement of her building. The story about Laura hurrying to the train station for an exam? Completely invented. A ready-made explanation designed to push investigators away from the apartment and toward a random disappearance. It almost worked. That is the part people never forget in cases like this. Not just the killing, the performance afterward, the calm voice, the neat timeline, the husband filing the report, the husband helping search, the husband standing in the apartment, repeating a lie while his wife
The
lay
evidence of
buried
cleaning
just
and body
minutes
movement,
away.
the false story,
In
and the
court,
accomplice.
Daniel's
This
defense
overwhelms
tried
the
to
argument.
soften the killing as a crime of passion, but the concealment destroyed that argument. This was not a man who panicked for 10 seconds and fell apart. This was a man who strangled his wife, cleaned what he could, invented a false route, misled police, moved a body, recruited his mistress, and maintained the act. That takes coldness. That takes intention. Daniel Bennett was convicted of intentional murder and sentenced to 15 years in prison. Linda received a lighter sentence for assisting after the fact. By then, she was pregnant, and Daniel continued trying to shield her even as the case collapsed around him. In the end, the truth wasn't hidden in some distant forest or on a train platform or in a nameless city crowd. It was in the apartment all along. in the brighter square on the wallpaper, in the washed blanket, in the delayed report, in the wrong clothes, in the chain behind the couch. That's how some of the darkest cases are solved. Not with one dramatic breakthrough, but with tiny details that don't fit the story a killer is trying to sell. And sometimes the person pretending to be most worried is the one who already knows exactly where the victim is. If you want more true crime stories like this, subscribe to True Crime 911